This is an explanation to question 15 in test 5, section 8 in the official SAT study guide. This first slide is just showing you some relationships between x values here and y values here on the y-axis. So the first graph is showing you when there would be a consistent correlation between the x value and the y value. So as the x value increases, the y value increases. In this particular graph, for the most part, the general trend is in that direction. And then this graph at the bottom is showing that the y value is not very dependent upon the x value. So here, this graph is almost just y equals 50, just a horizontal line where y equals 50. So this will come in handy on the next problem. So this problem says, Doug's biology experiment involved timing 12 hamsters in a maze. Each hamster received at least one practice before being timed. The scatter plot above shows the time each hamster took to complete the maze and the corresponding number of practices that each hamster received. Based on the data, which of the following functions best models the relationship between t, the number of seconds to complete the maze, and p, the number of practices? So we're looking to see if there's any kind of pattern between the number of practices and the time these hamsters take to complete the maze. So if we look at the hamsters who practice one time, we see that their time through the maze is 40 for one of them and 45 for the other one. And then for the hamsters who had two practices, their times were a little bit above 40 and between 45 and 50. And then for the hamsters who had three practices, their times were 40 seconds and 45 seconds. So this is a big clue that there's not really a direct correlation between the number of practices and the time, because as you can see, the hamsters who had one practice run have the exact same times as the two hamsters who have three practice runs. And then the hamsters who had four practices, we can see that it's not as if their time improved drastically compared to the other hamsters, and the same is true with the hamsters who had five practices. One of them had the exact same time as the hamster that practiced once and the hamster that practiced 3 times. And then you can see there's not really a consistent correlation between the number of practices and the time that the hamsters were able to complete the maze in. So let's check out these equations and see which one makes the most sense. So A is pretty good because the line of best fit would basically be going through the middle here, which is pretty much accurate because there is no correlation between the number of practices and the time. So this makes sense for now, but let's just look at the other ones to make sure that A is the best choice. B is saying that the time is the same as the number of practices, which really doesn't make sense because then all our values would be down here, because it'd say that the number of practices is exactly the same as the time in seconds that these hamsters are taking to complete the maze, so B doesn't make sense. And then C, this is saying that there's a consistent correlation between the time and the number of practices, so this graph would look like this, where as the number of practices increases, the time would also increase. So this is not illustrated in the graph. And this is a similar problem where as the number of practices would increase, the time would also increase. So that doesn't make sense. And the same is true for E. As the practices increase, the time overall would increase because you'd just be adding it to 44. So this one doesn't make sense. So A is our best answer choice.